Fellow Ghanaians, a very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. Now, it's been a policy that has been on the campaign platforms or in the manifestos of political parties since 2008. In 2008, then flag bearer of the NPP, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, promised to deliver free SHS to Ghanaians if voted into office as the President of the Republic of Ghana. Well, that did not happen because he lost to John Evans Atamils, but in 2012, he also promised free SHS. In fact, it was a major campaign promise of the NPP for the 2012 general elections. The NPP was unsuccessful in that particular election, and following the victory of John Dramani Mahama, he talked about the need for a progressively free senior high school. Well, the NPP in 2016 said that was certainly not the way to go, and they wanted free SHS now. More of, independence within the shortest possible time, and independence now. Nana Akufo-Addo, for a third time, was lucky as he was elected President of the Republic of Ghana. And in 2017, he promised that in fulfillment of the campaign promise of 2016, he was going to start the implementation of free SHS in September that year. The plan was to ensure that no child of secondary school going age, provided you had passed, would stay home due to financial constraints. Well, it did start in 2017 with lots of Ghanaians excited about the implementation of this policy. We're told, among others, we'll be using a petroleum revenue to fund the free SHS. Then fast forward to 2018, where we were faced with the need to engage in a double-track system. As a result of the plan to have lots of children going to secondary schools, space had become an issue, and with the government bent on ensuring that promise of ensuring that we built a knowledge-based economy, the government continued. And so we started the double-track system. It's been 3 years since the implementation of the double-track system. And in the course of this week on the Super Morning Show, we've had parents talk about how they've been coping with a double-track system. They've been talking about the need to have extra classes for their wards while they're at home. Some of you have said, well, that is not a problem because while you were in secondary school, you were having similar extra classes. Today, we had a headmaster talk about the challenges when it comes to the implementation of the free senior high school. And so on Upfront tonight, our focus is on one of the most important social intervention projects in recent times in this country, the free SHS policy. Is it time to review the policy? Is it time to have a comprehensive review, as some bodies have talked about? Or maybe we could just let it go. After all, we saw our best performance when it comes to the West African Senior School Certificate Examination in 2020, still under free SHS. Or maybe we can argue that these students did not undergo double-track system. My name is Winston Amwa, and thank you very much for joining us. You can actually join us on Twitter. Just tweet at us using the handle Joy News on TV, and we'll find your tweets, share it with the rest of the world. But when we return after this break, I'll be introducing my guest, and then we'll begin deliberations on this all-important conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. My name is Winston Amwa, and this morning our focus is on the free SHS policy. We are asking whether it's time for us to consider reviewing it. And we've been joined by the Executive Director of the Institute for Educational Studies. Now, they've conducted lots of research. They've been, studying and assessing the implementation of the free senior high school policy or program since it started in 2017. And its Executive Director, Peter Pateanti, joins me. Peter, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. I believe you're doing very well.
Good evening. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think it's better now. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining. And so let's get straight into the conversation. Now, that's a policy that started in 2017 after, lots of years of discussing it as a result of a political party campaign promise. It's been 4 years, but 3 years under the track system, or I mean the double track system. What's your assessment of the implementation of the policy so far, particularly the double track system?
All right, thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers. Yes, it's been 4 years for the free SHS and 3 years for the double track system. We should always, as I always say, analyze the implementation of the free SHS based on 8 thematic areas. That is, when the policy was implemented, we were told that it's supposed to create access, to ensure equity, and also to improve quality. So any kind of review of that policy should hinge around these 3 particular thematic areas. And we have done a lot of work. Of course, our latest work have not been published because it's going through certain protocols, and at appropriate time it will be published. What we can say is that in terms of access, we are all witnesses to how the policy has created a lot of access for various people to access secondary education. Of course, we knew that one of the greatest barriers to accessing education was the financial barrier. And the very moment that we were able to eliminate that particular barrier, we opened the door for a lot of people to access secondary education. That is the reason why, at a point in time, we needed to implement the double track system. So those of us who are into policy analysis and we...
Okay, so we'll get back to Peter shortly. I think there's a bit of a challenge with connectivity.
Some of these, the double track, we have said from day one that the double track is one of the best policies that have ever been implemented in our educational space. It's because it created room for a larger number of people to access secondary education. Because at that particular point in time, we were faced with the decision of whether to keep a number of students in the house and wait till we are able to develop the kind of infrastructure that we needed to accommodate all of them, or we have to now devise a means, an innovative way to accommodate all these kids to access secondary education. And that is why we resorted to the double track. And Ghana is not the only country that have done the double track. If you go to other jurisdictions, they call it the multi-track system, the year-round schooling, where at any point in time, the school infrastructure is being used. A typical example is what we do in Ghana here, what we call the sandwich system, where when regular students are on campus, as soon as they leave, another...
Okay, so... I think there seems to be a challenge with Peter. We'll try and
students will come and do sandwich, and then they.
Peter, yes, Peter. Yes, you're breaking a little bit. I think that maybe it was because of your connectivity, but you're making a point about the sandwich system of education. Yes, go ahead from there.
Yes, so that is what we used to have in our tertiary institutions. So it was just a transmission of that kind of system into our senior high schools to ensure that our infrastructures do not lie idle when the students go on break. But one thing that we have to understand is that implementing a tracking system comes with certain kinds of ingredients. Let me put it that way. It comes with certain things that every educational system should have. It should have a continuous community education system. It should have an operating library system.
We would come to the community education system, but you've talked about how that was the only thing left to us at the time. Now, the government took over in 2017, and there are those who made the argument at the time that when the government took over in 2017, the promise of implementation of free SHS, had always been a campaign promise of the NPP, right, from 2008. So also promising to ensure that there's increase in access to education. The government should have known, for instance, that by 2018, there was going to be a problem, and should have started the building of, infrastructure in the secondary schools before they even got to 2018.
Yes, if you have followed our publications, one of the things that we indicated during that time when the minister then indicated that the double track will run between 5 to 7 years, we said that with the kind of commitment in terms of infrastructure commitment, we should be able to do this within 3 to 5 years. And of course, if you realize that just before we resumed from the corona break, when schools came back, there was an announcement that there was a likelihood that most of the schools at the first years will not run double track. And as we talk now, most of the schools are not running double track. It means that we are improving on the infrastructure challenges in some of the schools. The only difficulty is that we decided to expand the infrastructure in most of our already existing first class or category A schools. And that is understandable because a lot of the applications for secondary education goes to some of these or most of these schools. So you realize that the number of students that would want to go to Wegehe, number of students that would want to go to Holy Child, number of students that would want to go to Infante Pim, and all those first class category A schools always double as compared to the other schools. So what the system decided to do, the authorities decided to do, was to now increase the infrastructure in these schools. My problem with this is that we seem to concentrate the kind of quality education in quotes to these kinds of schools. What would have been more ideal in my perspective would have been to adopt the model system that President Kufuor used by bringing some of these schools in our district that have or lack this infrastructure, so that at the end of the day they will also come up to a certain level like these already category A schools. Unfortunately, we didn't do something like that, and we decided to improve the infrastructure in most of our category A schools. And that is what we've been doing for the past 3-4 years. There's been an improvement in the infrastructure, although there are certain challenges in terms of beds, furniture, and all those things. But these are all issues that we need to understand arise because of the problem of money, and that would lead us to maybe talk about the financing of the policy.
We would get to the financing.
It is when we decide to relook at the financing model of the policy that will be able to release certain amounts of money to embark on the infrastructure challenges that we are having. But since we have decided to do this model of financing, it's putting a lot of pressure on the finances of the ministry, and that would not allow the ministry to embark on the massive infrastructure things that they would want to do if they have the kind of resources that they need to have.
Let's get to the double track system, and we're talking about continuous education, a community system of education, and libraries being opened. What do you say is a challenge with the implementation of the double track in its current form?
Okay, so if you look at the tracking system across certain jurisdictions, you see that what they do is that because the students would have to stay in the house for a longer period of time. Remember, we are doing the semester system. So for some 2 months or so, students will be in the house. Sometimes 1 month, the student will be in the house. There is the need for some kind of there's a need for the student to still continue with this education by implementing certain things here and there. And I remember the deputy minister then, the now Minister of Education, indicating or mentioning that when students are on break, libraries in communities will be opened where students will be able to go in there to go and then access education and all that. And that is one of the challenges that we are having, and that is why parents are also complaining, because if we had these systems in place where we have our community libraries opening, or we have centers within our communities where students who would want to study would have access to these educational resources and materials to go and study. If we had a very well-designed virtual learning system where students who are on a track and are supposed to be in the house would be taking through certain topics whilst they are in the house, and that is designed solely for them. If we are able to equip our teachers in such a way that
Peter, I mean, there's all the things you're talking about. If we had, we don't have them. I mean, we've never had a very good library system. Right from the get-go, yes, exactly. So right from the get-go, we knew we had these challenges, and so hoping to do these things were not going to work.
No, we could have done that. We could have done that because we are running the Ghana television, Ghana Learning Channel for some time now. So all that we needed to do was to just bring down the entire program, restructure it in such a way that within, let's say, May to June, the green track students who are in Form 1 and Form 2 will be in the house. Can we design a program, look at where they go to, and then allow the virtual learning platform to continue from there, or review those topics with them during that 1 month? It is something that we could have done. We didn't do. We could have now gone back to our library system. Of course, the Ghana Library Authority is doing a good work, but because of the double track, we could have now gone back to our library system, resource our community centers, create certain places within the community centers for students coming back to the community after they have been asked to go home because of the tracking system, to move in there. Those who would want to study, of course, we should also understand that it's not all these kids that would want to access some of these things, and that would also have some parents would also have some responsibility when it comes to some of these things. So these are things that we could have done. I will never say that we couldn't do some of these things. These are things that we could have done. We could have asked our teachers to keep a track of what their students are doing whilst they are in the house. That would also mean that giving the teachers an extra work, that will come with some kind of commitment from the government, the ministry, that they would have to do. And these are things that we could have done. And I will never agree with anybody who says that we couldn't,
so Peter,
we would not be able to have done that.
When we started the implementation of double track, we said, so we're increasing contact hours, and so we're having more hours than we had initially. Now, initially, you didn't have students having to go through the community library system. You didn't have teachers having to track their performance while they were at home. So if we're increasing contact hours, and therefore we had more instructional time than we had previously, why did we need all these?
Okay, so one thing that we have to understand is that increasing contact hours, which is good, is not ideal. If you study the educational literature, it tells you that most of the times contact hours are abused here and there because teachers in some instances might not make full use of the contact hours. So what is more important is that teachers are supposed to ensure that the students' time on task is increased, there is effective teaching, and that would boil down to the kind of monitoring and supervision that is carried out in the schools. So you might want to increase contact hours, but teaching and learning will still not be effective if you don't have an effective supervision and monitoring system.
So that's the solution. We ensure effective supervision and monitoring systems coupled with increased contact hours, and then we're solving a major problem, aren't we?
Exactly. But then the students would still have to go to the house, and sometimes they would have to stay a longer period than they used to when you are not doing a tracking system. That is the problem, because if you are not doing a tracking system, the students go on vacation maximum 3-4 weeks and then they are back. But if you are doing a tracking system, you have your students sometimes staying in the house for 2 to 3 months because another track is on campus. And what do students do? What are students supposed to do during this long period of time? They need to be engaged academically. It is assumed that parents would help the students in terms of the academic work by maybe engaging the service of an extra teacher to come and help them. But there should be a system put in place to ensure that students or parents who cannot afford these extra tuition and other things still benefit from the guidance of the educational system that we've put in place. And that is why we needed to make operational our libraries. That is why we needed to make operational our community centers and provide certain educational resources in these centers. That is why we needed to make operational our virtual teaching system so that students would be able to still follow some of these teaching and learning that goes on within that particular platform. We couldn't do that, and that is why parents would complain and say that my child or my ward has been in the house for 2-3 months, he has not had any kind of education, and they are worried about that.
So if I get you clearly, you say we're implementing the double track or the multiple track system not in the best of ways.
I always say that there is a difference between a policy and how it is implemented.
Sure.
So when people come and condemn a policy, I get a little bit disturbed, because if you read about tracking in most other jurisdictions, it is a fantastic idea, and that is why a lot of people are accessing secondary education.
But did we implement it poorly?
Yes, so it is the implementation of the policy that have had challenges, and we will need to address them. And I think that we don't lack the capacity to address these challenges.
How did we implement it poorly?
Again, please.
How did we implement it poorly?
because whilst the double track allowed us to increase access, to increase enrollment, to make sure a lot of people get access to secondary education, we forgot that these kids will go back to the house and stay for 2-3 months, and they need to be engaged in one way or the other to ensure that they are academically active when they are getting back to school. We forgot that part, and we did not do well with that part, and that is why we are having that kind of challenge that we are having.
Let's get to the financing. I mean, we'll come back to the tracking system later on, but I mean, the financing is very important. You've talked about the need to review the financing of the free SHS policy. What is wrong with the financing as we have it?
Before I answer your question, I would say that when it comes to the free SHS policy and talking about the financing, you don't win the economic argument. You will never win, because it's got a political dimension. But I feel that the political benefits have been chopped for now, and we should face facts and be bold enough to talk about the financing of the policy. If you look at the financing structure of the policy, I recently released a paper looking at the whole policy in terms of where we have been financing the policy from, and 45 to 50% of the money is coming from the oil resource. And oil resource, we know it is a finance resource. It is not a resource that we can rely on. So when you are running a policy of this magnitude, which is very important and has a lot of impact on our generation, on this particular country, on the economy, you need to have a sustainable source of financing. So I give you an example like the National Health Insurance Scheme. And you will note that at a point in time, we have the National Health Insurance Levy. And that ensures that there is a constant stream of income that goes into that particular kind of policy. That is something that we will need to think about when we talk about the free SHS policy. We need to get a constant stream of revenue that will go into a particular kind of coffers that will cater for this policy. For now, we do not have, and we have spent almost 7-point-something billion on the policy for the past 3 years. 50% of this is coming from the oil money. We don't know how long these resources are going to last for us, and we also don't want a situation whereby, because of financing, we will not be able to continue such a brilliant policy. One thing that we have to understand also is that the benefits of such a policy will not be realized within the next 2-3 years. No, it will be realized within the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And that is why this is a very important policy, because it's got the opportunity to change the dynamics of our labor force, of our human capital. So when we are talking of financing it, you are looking at how best do you make sure that you release an amount or certain amount of money within the education sector, and ensure that that kind of money that you are going to release will go into other areas within the education sector and not outside the education sector. So within the education sector, you have the tertiary education in there, you have secondary education, you have basic education. Of course, TVET is also there, which is attached to secondary education. You have inclusive and then special education. You have non-formal education. You have administration and the management also there. These areas all demand an amount of money when you look at the budget of the ministry. And if you are spending almost 35% of the amount of money that goes into the ministry on secondary education, it means that you are neglecting all these other areas within the ministry and the education sector, which needs not to be so. So what do? You do targeting. And when you talk of targeting, people come and say that how do you target when we are talking about free SHS, and why is it that you are saying that some people should pay and some people should not pay? Any policy of education financing that ignores the ability to pay is not a policy that needs to be implemented, because at any point in time, people would have the opportunity or the ability to pay. And that is why the finance minister, Honorable Ken Furiata, some years past indicated that some people should be allowed to pay. He went on further to even introduce what they call the voluntary contribution in the budget.
How does that become a universal free SHS if people are made to pay? Because the promise was to have free SHS free for all, and there are some who are actually advocating a chit system. So if it's 1,000 Ghana cedis the government is paying for, all students, if I even have my child going to a private school, I'll be giving that chit as well, 1,000 Ghana cedis. Then I'll add that to my fees and pay for my ward's fees. So how do you do that when, the plan is to ensure that everybody who goes to public secondary school does so for free?
Yes, the intention is to provide free senior high school for all children. But if you look at the themes, one of the themes there is equity.
Yes.
Equity means that you are supposed to help those who are down there come up to a level, to reach the level where others are already have already reached. But what we did in terms of implementation is equality. Equality meaning that irrespective of who you are and whether you can pay or not, we are paying for you. And that defeats even the theme that was selected for the policy. So yes, we want everybody to access secondary education. Within our society system, that is why we have social policies. That is why we have systems to support the vulnerable, the marginalized in society. You will need to structure your payment system in such a way that those who would have lost because of the policy benefits more than those who already is gaining because whether the policy is there or not. And that is how most social interventions and social policies are designed. So by the nature of how we are financing this policy, and because it is taking a lot of putting a lot of pressure on the finances of the Ministry of Education, and that has led to the neglect of other areas within the ministry, it is just ideal that you sit back and look at how best do you categorize or group the number of students that you have in such a way that you do not make sure other people are not benefiting because of your grouping or your categorization. And I've said that this can be done. This can be done simply by just getting data, and then based on the data, you group students out to those who can pay, those who can pay partially, and those who cannot pay at all.
The current minister, yes, but
full scholarship for those who cannot pay. You pay half for those who can pay partially, and then those who can pay fully are allowed to pay fully, whilst there are other benefits within the education system that they would enjoy. That will still meet the target of ensuring access to secondary education by all groups of people.
Now, the current minister has made a point before, while he was deputy minister, that how do you do means testing? How are you going to achieve that? So as it stands, you're giving everybody a chance. But you've also raised, so you're saying if you can pay for your ward's secondary education, right? If I get you clearly, you say people should be made to pay.
Yes.
And those who can pay, those who can pay partially will be made to pay partially. And those who cannot.
It's going to be done using a robust algorithm. And I think I've authored an article recently in the Daily Graphic. I think your platform also published it, giving a detailed analysis of how this can be done. It is something that can easily be done. You just have to design an index.
How would that be done? I have read it, but for those who haven't read it, how do you want to achieve that?
So what we are proposing basically is that you have various ways of measuring people's standard of living. And one of the ways that you do is to do proxies. So you have students who are going to write BEC, they fill forms that they are supposed to use to select schools. At that point in time, you have the opportunity to collect data from the students. Collect data as in the family background of the students, collect data as in the number of siblings that they have, where they are coming from, the occupation of the parents, and all other important details that I cannot state here. And then that data is now forwarded to a group of technocrats or technicians who, based on WER standards, will be able to now use certain indexes to group the responses that have been given to these questions that have been answered by the students into students who can pay, students who can pay partially, and students who cannot pay at all. This is so easy to do, and I think that if we have a clear mind and objective about this, and we are able to implement it, we'll be able to save a lot of money from the policy and then use it even to finance the infrastructure deficit in our education system.
The challenge we've had in this country is the abuse of systems or certain things that we do. I mean, you're talking about, so while they're filling their forms for BEC, now there are persons who, knowing that this is what is going to be done, would actually say, well, I cannot pay. And we create a picture that at the end, you may think that this person can afford. And so can't afford. We've seen it with the Cocoa Board scholarship scheme, for instance. Those who were supposed to enjoy it did not enjoy it. So how do we ensure that we get a means testing system that would not be subject to abuse, and thus would have those who cannot pay being those who truly cannot pay?
Okay, so I think you want me to put all the strategies here. Of course, we have to get some consultancies.
Oh, but it's very important. This is a very important policy that we're looking at. Yes.
What we can basically do is that we have the LEAP system working.
Yes.
We have the LEAP system working. How are we able to identify these people and then give them the needed support? Just recently, when we had a lockdown, we were able to identify people who needed support, and then we sent food to them, although people had challenges with it. So within our system, there are ways to do these things. It is just the political will to say that, yes, it is time we sit down and look at how we are financing this policy, and then we will invite the people who have the technical know-how to use the softwares and then the kind of understanding and knowledge that they've got to be able to run the system in such a way that we will get such at least 90 to 80% robust system. It will save us a lot of money. My problem basically is that we are pushing a lot of money into this policy for good reasons, but as we are doing that, we are having a lot of challenges, and also we are having a lot of issues pertaining to other areas within the education sector. If you go around some of the basic schools right now, you will see a lot of challenges that these basic schools are going through. Even if you look at our tertiary education system, you will agree with me that we are having a lot of challenges in terms of infrastructure, and get farm project starts and they are not able to complete. There are a lot of challenges that are going through that particular system. Not even to talk about our TVET education system, not to talk about our non-formal education system that have been completely abandoned, not to talk about our agriculture education system that seems not existing. So these are real challenges within the system that we will need money to support. So if you are pushing almost 35% of your budget into one area within the education sector, which is part of the 6 areas you are supposed to take care of, that means that you have to find ways and means to ensure that you are using the money appropriately or very well as you would want it to be used. I also have to state that one of the challenges, if you read most of the reports that comes within our subsector, I mean the sub-Saharan sector in terms of education, it tells you that in this area we push a lot of money into our education, but the problem is that in terms of efficiency of usage, it is about 40%. So 60% of the money that we put into the sector go waste, and that is something that you would need to prevent. So how do you do that? You need to implement efficient financing models that will seek to make sure that you do not throw money away, but you are safeguarding the little resources that you have and saving the rest for the other sectors within the economy.
Let's get to another point that you made, talking about the financing of, so you've talked about how we have a financing model for national health insurance. Are you calling for a free SHS levy for us to use in funding free SHS?
Okay, so we've not called for a free SHS levy. I think maybe in the near future I might want to look at that. But there are
you've talked about you've talked about the fact that we have an NHI levy. So if that is the case,
yes, I use that to indicate that there is a constant stream of income that comes into that particular kind of policy. So at any point in time, even with that, you've seen the challenges with the national health insurance. So if you don't have that kind of thing with the free SHS, it means that the likelihood to sustain that policy is low. But I'm saying that it is something that we can consider. It's something that we might want to push when we have a broader consultative assembly and we are discussing some of these things. We might want to push for a levy that would finance the policy. That is also part of the sustainability aspect. But what I was coming to say was that another thing that we have to look, and I think if you look at the way we have been changing our computer placement system, it seems that we are tilting towards that particular direction, is to make sure that we implement an 80-20 day boarding policy. an 80-20 day boarding policy, simply because the border spends a lot of money, or we spend a lot of money on the border than the day student. So if you look at the fee structure, we are spending like almost 2,000 on the border in terms of to keep that border, and then we are spending less than 1,000 or 800 Ghana cedis on the day student. So if you want to save money and ensure that you get money for other things within the education sector, then make sure that you are pushing most of your students into the day school system. You are pushing most of your students into a radius within their community where they would not go and seek for accommodation. That is also one way we'll be able to save money for that. And in doing that, that will tie in with the policy I was talking about, with the model system that President Kufuor introduced. So if every community, we have one model school that is up there, like Wesley Girls, like Infante Pim, like Prestec, like Every Girls, it means that parents would not want to send their wards from, let's say, if they are in Cape Coast, they would not want to send their wards to Accra for them to attend Prestec, because they have Infante Pim in Cape Coast. And that is something that we need to do. Maybe it will take a longer period of time, but we need to restructure our infrastructure interventions in such a way that we target community schools, and then we provide the needed kind of upliftment for that particular school. And then we now restructure our day boarding system in such a way that majority of the students access day schooling rather than they going to the boarding house.
Well, my guest this evening is Peter Pate-Anti, who is Executive Director of the Institute for Education Studies. We're talking about the free SHS policy, and we're asking the question whether it's time for us to consider a review of it. This is Upfront on the Joy News Channel. I'm Winston Amwa. Stay with us. When we return, we're going to tackle the quality question when it comes to free SHS. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us here on Upfront on the Joy News Channel. And this evening, we're focusing on free SHS policy implementation, whether there's need to review its implementation. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Peter Pate-Anti is Executive Director of the Institute for Education Studies, and he's joined us. So, we've talked about the financing bit. You say we may want to consider eventually having some bit of a levy on it. We also want to consider having a lot more day students in our schools. Well, the idea of having a boarding system is to have unity and cohesion, national cohesion and unity amongst us. So a way of ensuring that people from different walks of life get to be in a school, and that in itself gets to achieve a very important aspect of our national fabric. But let's get into one important thing. So is access, equity, and quality. Now let's start with the contact hours. There are those who have said, when we go, that way, we're going to leave some of the students behind. Because with increased contact hours, the gifted and talented students, they're good to go. The middle level learners, well, they may get between 60 to 80%, and they're good to go. How about the low level learners? How would they cope with a system with increased contact hours, more instructional time, Peter?
If you follow the ministry, they tell you that they have what they call the interventions, and they are it's supposed to be implemented in all schools, where remedial measures are given to students that are not that's good. They are below average. The problem with that particular intervention, from our research, it seems to suggest that some of the students feel that by attending those kind of remedial classes, they are seen as not academically good. So although they are not academically good, they shy away from attending those remedial classes. Others also seems to, our research also points to the fact that some of the teachers, instead of doing the remedial classes for these special group of students, put every student together and would want to teach them. So that is an area that the ministry would have to, Organic Education Service will have to pay a critical attention to, because it's the way to answer your question as to how do we deal with these students. And I've said that we need to even go beyond remedial measures and implement differentiation in teaching, which means that whilst you are teaching the entire class, you are paying attention to different kinds of students within your class. And these are skills that now, every now and then, we will need to upgrade our teachers to be able to use these skills in the classroom. So there are various ways that we can attend to students that are below average and help them come up. In terms of exercises, you might not want to give the same exercise to all your students, because the gifted, as you said, would understand the concepts that you are trying to explain. So you will need to give a different kind of exercise to the average student and that of the below average student. These are differentiation measures that teachers need to employ to be able to teach their students whilst you are increasing your contact hours. But of course, it will demand time, it will demand skills set from the teacher, and we think that the Ghana Education Service should be in a position to help teachers implement some of these measures. That's the only way we'll be able to attend to the below the average students.
Based on these challenges you've talked about, how is the current system likely to impact the quality of education?
This quality issue creates problem because personally, I'm someone a lot of the work I do is in quality education.
Sure, I know.
So I understand quality education. It's a field that if you just wake me up, I'll be able to talk about. And I see that in our system, you realize that we have inputs, we have outputs, and then we have outcomes. In any quality education system, you want to look at your inputs. So your inputs here looks at your teacher to student ratio. You are looking at student to desk ratio, student to textbook ratio, student to classroom ratio. You are looking at the kind of school environment that you have. You are looking at a whole lot of factors. These factors, if you get them intact, somebody would say you are providing quality education, because under normal circumstances, these are supposed to translate into the output, which basically is cognitive development and academic achievement. So you have to ask yourself, the kind of resources that we have in our schools, are they able, do they meet the set standards that we have set for ourselves in terms of quality inputs for education?
Do they meet the standards? Do they meet the standards?
In terms of teacher to student ratio, no. We are doing 1:40, 1:45. And that is even after we have implemented the double track, because before the double track, we had classes of over 120 students, 100 students. And if you open the lines now, some of the teachers will tell you that they even have up to 70 students in the class. So in terms of teacher to student ratio, we are not doing well. In terms of student to desk ratio, most of the schools, if you look at the challenges that are coming, the complaints that are coming, some of those schools are not having the requisite furniture to support the education. So you don't always have the full complement of the furniture. In terms of student to textbook ratio, that is a very serious challenge that we have in our schools. The ministry decided to provide for the core textbooks. There are a lot of challenges with that, but what the communication refused to do was to tell parents that you are supposed to provide for the elective textbooks. And because of that, most parents have not provided for the elective textbook for their wards, and that is creating a lot of problems for the students. These are part of the findings that we did when we did our comprehensive review of the free SHS policy. So the input variables, some of them are doing well, some of them are not doing well at all, and that definitely would impact on the output. And the output, as I've said, is just the academic or cognitive development. So you would want your student to pass. So some people will also want to look at the pass rate of the student to be able to say that, oh, the students are doing well because they passed a particular exams. But quality education transcends output. It goes into outcome. And that is what in our part of the world we do not focus on. And that is why I said that the kind of investment that we are doing now, its impact on the country will be felt 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Because it's got a lot of externalities that you can also benefit from, although you might not have paid for the kind of education that the children are having now. So the outcomes, we have not been able to read them. How is our education able to help our wards, help contribute to the development of the country? How is education able to help our wards contribute to nation building? How is the education able to help our wards create their own employment so that they will contribute to the economic development of the country? These are things that our education have not been able to achieve holistically in the years past.
Well,
in the coming
but
years, it might be difficult for us to
yes,
get
but Peter,
there.
I mean, talking about quality education, well, if students sit for exam and they pass, that would be an indication of how well they're doing. Why wouldn't you want to use pass rate of an exam in determining whether the students are grasping what is being taught them?
The last time I said this, I got into trouble. It is good. It is good for people to say that, oh, because you pass exams, you have quality education. It is normal. It is normal. But for me and for people in policy and for people in education, it is not the case. And I have to explain this.
Go ahead.
If a student sits for exams, there are a lot of factors that contribute to the student's performance. Students' performance are determined by so many factors, 1001. The student's background can be a contributing factor. His family background can be a contributing factor. The school environment, the teacher, you have the teacher factors, you have the student factors, we have the school factors, we have the community factors, we have the educational policy factors. There are a lot of factors that contribute to a student passing an exam. In fact, the kind of exams that the student is writing is also a factor. Recently, there was a paper that was released. I don't know whether people have seen it, but that seems to suggest that the standard nature of the question students answer over the years should be looked at if one wants to compare the performance of students over years. So, for example, if you look at the performance of students in 2019 and you look at the performance of students in 2020, the paper says that don't be quick to say that students who sat for 2019 did well than the students who sat for 2020. You need to subject the two papers they wrote to critical analysis and see whether their standard in terms of their difficulty level is the same. What I mean to say is that a lot of factors contribute to a student's performance in an examination. And sometimes that day, what happens within the examination hall can either make a student pass or fail. So it is just too simplistic for somebody to say that because of this policy or because of that policy, a student has passed.
So how do we measure the quality? So how do we measure the quality aspect of the free SHS then? Because we're talking about access, equity, and quality. How do we measure that quality aspect? I mean, lots of people have talked about the performance in the last WASI as an indication that the system is working. You're saying we just can't do that. So how do we measure it?
Yes, so what would need to be done is that you just have to now do a scientific work, which we all do in research. You have to now look at these variables of the students that sat for the exams, control all of them, and then hold the free SHS policy constant. Of course, you would understand that this is a very rigorous exercise, and a lot of people would not want to do that. So they would go with the notion that the performance in the students, the performance of the students is because of the free SHS policy. Of course, you would also want to understand them because you ask yourself, okay, because of the free SHS, the student has a little peace of mind. The student, in terms of maybe sacking the student to go to the house to collect fees, was not there. There were certain interventions that was done. Students were exposed for the first time to past questions over the years to enable them have an access to the kind of questions that WAEC normally posed. Apart from that, the students, the core subject teachers were also looking for some workshops in specific areas for them to be trained as to how they should teach the subject in a way that the students will be able to understand. So these are interventions that might have impacted on the student performance, but it is simplistic still for you to state that the performance is linked only to the free SHS policy. That is a position I'm not ready to accept now.
All right, Peter Partianti, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's been glad having you join us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. Thank you very, very much. And folks, that'll be all from us this evening on Upfront on the Joy News channel. Make sure you join us same time tomorrow evening. My name is Winston. I'm on behalf of the team. Thank you so much for joining us. Up next is Joy News Prime. Keep watching the Joy News channel.